Hi, I'm here to talk to you about the building of a national monument, how to build a future for the Santa Susana Field Laboratory. When we talk about this, a lot of people ask me, so why would you want to build a national monument in this place where these accidents happened? Well, first of all, it provides a known outcome, so we can clean up the site in a smart way that is based on how the land will be used. And that also assures that nobody will ever live there. And this is, I believe, one of the only mechanisms that make that possible and assures it in perpetuity. So when we're trying to honor the past, when we think about space history, so much of our world today, what we see around us, we see through the lens of the technology that was developed at Santa Susana. Things happened at Santa Susana that changed the world forever. And when we think about what a unique place it is, where yearning to the stars is made evident through the art in the Burro Flats painted cave. So thousands of years ago, in the very same place, the same ideas may have been happening. So more importantly, when we think of the Antiquities Act of 1906, it expressly is for the purpose of preserving Native American culture, and so that's very important, and that's what we are trying to do here, is to protect the past for the future. So what about cleanup? There are two very important things to understand when we think about this. First of all, we cannot build a monument on shame, so we need to talk about what is possible. We need to be responsible. We need to have a cleanup that we can trust. Making a national monument at Santa Susana provides that known outcome, as I mentioned, which allows us to clean up in a sense that so that we know how it will be used for the future. It needs to be safe, it needs to be believable, and it needs to be something that people can trust. So that's why we need transparency and collaboration from all sides of the coin. When we look at this timeline, we have to remember that some people, while some people have just been involved for a few years, others have been involved literally for decades. So when we think about the heels dug in certain positions on both sides of the coin, it's important to remember that when people have been going to meeting after meeting for so many years, and we're still waiting for the cleanup to start, it's important to appreciate that. So when we look at these cleanup agreements, they are signed and they're in the process of implementation. So we have the consent order in 2007, and that applies to the soil and the groundwater and to all three parties, Boeing, NASA, and the Department of Energy. And then in 2010, the AOC, the Administrative Order on Consent, was signed between NASA and the state of California, and then also between the Department of Energy and the state of California. And so that only applies to the soil, so the underlying 2007 agreement applies to all of the groundwater for all three parties still. So it's really important that these issues are addressed. Now, when we look at these agreements, there's a lot of strong feelings on both sides, and I can certainly attest that I was not the biggest fan of the AOC. In fact, I was a pretty vocal critic of it. There are many problems with it. In fact, it's very, very broad, but in a sense that also allows us to formulate a workable solution. We have pushed for years to make it a compromise, and what we have learned is that compromise isn't on the table, at least not right now. So what we need to do is follow the process, and we need to make sure that it is reasonable, fair, protective, and most importantly, implementable, because if it isn't, it doesn't protect anyone. So that's a really important I think, objective that we need to keep in mind and keep our eye on that prize. Also to remember is that the AOC is not just background, like everything goes. That is just simply not the case. If it were, it would only be one page, but it's indeed 45 pages of details with very specific exceptions. One of which is a very important exception of protecting Native American artifacts. And there are many who will say that it's not strong enough, it isn't specific enough, And we agree. We believe that that is a problem, and that is why we have asked for help with this. And Dianne Feinstein has put into the congressional record a specific definition of artifacts in that appropriations committee. So this is in the congressional record, page 12. And then quite specifically, what it does is it then states that the preservation of the tribal artifacts at Santa Susana Field Laboratory, as NASA works to meet the requirements of the 2010 Administrative Order on Consent for Remedial Action, along with preceding agreements as well as court orders, the agency is encouraged to protect the unique and historically significant Native American sites on the property, including but not limited to the Burro Flats Painted Cave. So that is really taking a step in the right direction, and it allows us to take these exceptions much more seriously. As far as what a national monument means for the future, one of the things it does mean is it can mean millions in an economic boost for the surrounding communities. When we look at Facebook, 5-mile radius of the site, we have 92,000 people between the age of 18 and 65. And that is not people that live here, that is people that are on Facebook. And when we go out to 6 miles, we get to nearly 200,000. So this can really be a place that people come from all around. But most importantly, the local community will definitely benefit. And again, we need to emphasize the primary solution that it brings to the table is that it ensures that no one will ever live there, and it makes certain that we are able to protect the native cave paintings in perpetuity, and it provides resources to do that properly, and that's especially important because we want to make sure that we educate for it as well. Another thing is, the test stands. The test stands are such an important part of our space history. Demolition has been put on hold in order to explore the possibility of saving the historic structures for a national monument. So Alpha, Bravo, and Coca have been deferred and are under analysis. But we have to be real. It's been a year since Charlie Bolden agreed to defer the demolition, and there are some things that may not be able to be saved. In fact, Coca is probably one of the most difficult in the sense of how to get around the contamination and make sure that that is managed. So we have to be real about what is possible and what we can save. And then we have to do everything we can to do that, okay? This is something that we need to emphasize every step of the way. On the Department of Energy side, they've also begun their Section 106 process to look into how to protect the sacred sites. Now, I wanted to kind of show this this image. This is an image from the Department of Energy when they were doing their scoping meetings for the EIS. And really, it really emphasizes just what a tall order this really is and how difficult it is. Confidence goes down in what this cleanup is going to look like as long as time continues to go by and we still don't have a solution. So that's something that's very, very important. In order to have confidence in the future, we need to know what it's going to look like. And this provides that possibility. We need to understand how it will work, how it will apply, who will do it, and we need accountability so that we can trust it. There's been a lot of lacking trust, and we need to rebuild that. When we look at the actual contamination, this is the RAD map, radiological impacts. And this is the Radiological Handling Materials Facility. And that is probably the highest impacts on the site. But if you look, that's really mostly it. It really is quite doable. And when we look at this in comparison to the chemicals, it's a non-starter. So the chemicals are really where the soil is going to be driven. And we need to have smart solutions. We need to look at alternative solutions, treatment on site, everything we can to reduce trucks. And we need to take that seriously without compromising safety. And if we know what the future is going to look like, we can do a pretty good job of that. And that's I think, what our goal should be. So when we look at this from the Chumash world and the context overall, and we try to find solutions for the future. One of the things that was done through the work by Clark Stevens in looking at how this might visually um, look in the future, he looked into the ELV, the Expendable Launch Vehicle area, and how that might be able to be converted. And when we looked into the solstice lines, okay, so when they did the study of this is amazing. But basically, Little Bear is along the same line here with the site, with the Chumash Indian Museum, and so Ursa Minor, and if you go to the Chumash Indian Museum, it is amazing because there's a rock right there that is a reflection of the stars above, and the holes of the brighter stars are bigger, and then the holes of the more distant, more faint stars are smaller. So it's a really magnificent interpretation of the sky, and to imagine that it is also on that conceptual axonometric line, it's just amazing. This is the wall at the Chatsworth train station, and this is a depiction of the Burro Flats cave painting. So if you haven't been there and you don't commute, shame on you. You really should check it out. And it's a reminder of what was and how it really was Sky Valley at the top there, this crown jewel, and we hope to bring that notion back. This is another look at the ELV area and the opportunities that might be presented. This wall was a very, very strong, it's basically intended to contain an explosion. And so the idea here is potentially to integrate modern past with the culture of the ancient past for the future. And so that's something, in order to navigate the cleanup and make that work, that's something that is still pending, if you will, but we're very hopeful. And it's really important to be able to visualize something for the future in order to believe that it can happen. So we have a lot of support so far. We've got from the Native American Heritage Commission, where they point out that out of 164 Native American tribes in California, and 109 of which are federally recognized, there are only 2 national monuments. So the idea of protecting this for this culture and for the future is really very important. We also have support from the Office of Historic Preservation, and this is also the letter from the tribe asking very specifically to defer demolition of the rocket test stands to preserve space history. And as a result of that, we have a response from Mr. Bolden of NASA, who has agreed to defer it for the purpose of exploration as a national monument, and we are very hopeful. The newly elected tribal chairman Kenneth Kahn has also written to request legislation, as well as an additional request to save those test stands. So now we really need to take it over the finish line. There are many who say that it's much easier to get people along at this point than it is when you're saying, let's start a project. So let's get together and take this over the finish line. There are less than 110 days left in this administration to make that possible. Thank you very much. So I hope you'll take seriously that this is so important. This is within our reach, and what we need to is really your voices. Send that postcard, tell your friends, tell your family, and we're hopeful that we can really make this happen. Thanks again.